How do you define a honeymoon, Mohammed? I mean, if President Biden has a moneyhoon, if he has a honeymoon, how do you poll for that? How do you figure that out?
It's very traditionally done with the approval rating. So most presidents, with the exception of President Trump, have seen that honeymoon period where their approval rating really climbs high and then settles down to where it ends up being most of their term. Usually that's assumed to be giving the president a chance. What's interesting with President Biden is that he actually is coming in at a relatively strong point. His favorability rating, which really operates as an approval rating before a president takes office, is actually really high for him. He's at 57. When he was elected vice president, he was at about 31. So it really shows you he's really climbed and stepped up to a much more positive place in the minds of more Americans. The transition has also had positive approval ratings. 68% of people said that they approve of the way that the transition was handled. It's not as high as Barack Obama's, which was at 83%, but certainly much higher than Donald Trump's at 44%.
Normalcy. What an interesting word. We're going to talk to Jeannie Zaino about this in a bit here. But does America want normalcy?
Look, America right now is highly dissatisfied with the state of affairs in the country. We take the mood of the nation every January. We've done so over the past 20 years. Right now, 11% of Americans are satisfied with the way things are going in the United States, 88% dissatisfied. It is a record high in people saying they're dissatisfied with the moral climate in the country. 81% say they're dissatisfied with it. 73% dissatisfied with the way system of government and how government works. 41%, that's a almost 20-point jump, now say they're dissatisfied with the state of opportunity for people to work hard and get ahead. So there are real problems that America's facing in terms of satisfaction. But when we ask Americans about the most important problems, it's really clear what they want this new team to focus on. 29%, the highest rate of most important problem, say poor government, poor leadership. 22% mention COVID. 9% mention the economy, which is, of course, related. 12% mention unifying the country as the most important problem. 10% race relations. So as you see, very little of that has to do with sort of looking back, and a lot of it really has to do with looking forward, attacking the economic challenges and the public health crisis that the country is currently facing.
Mohamed, how many people in the U.S. believe this was a fair election, won fairly?
Well, I think the critical question is how many Republicans believe it wasn't, because that's really the question out there. It's been proven that it was a fair election. Per the latest polls, about 7 in 10 Republicans have questions about the outcome of the election. What's really key is, will that change as time passes? Or another way to look at it is, will President Biden be able to build that goodwill? He starts off at a better place than Donald Trump. 27% of Republicans currently approve of the approach he's taken with the transition. 27% of Republicans compared to 13% of Democrats for Trump. So he's making a little bit of edgeway. But these next 6 months are absolutely critical to see whether or not this hyper-partisan environment, not to be overcome, but certainly set aside to deal with some of these national challenges.
And this actually goes to the point that I wanted to ask you. So the Biden transition approval remains high at about 68%. Do you have a breakdown of whether, Republicans feel, how do they have him in terms of approval?
Absolutely. So currently 27% of Republicans approve of that transition, 71% of independents, 96% of Democrats. To compare Donald Trump, it was 87% of Republicans, 33% of independents, and 13% of Democrats. So it's not like President Obama, when he came in, he had 72% approval of his transition from Republicans, came in a very, very high moment emotionally in America. So he's nowhere near there, but he's certainly about 15 points higher than where President Trump was with the opposing party at this point.
Mohamed, this is way too premature, but I love having you on. How do we do with third parties in America? I mean, I always think of H. Ross Perot, but give me some vision here on a third-partiness of America.
That's an excellent question, and it's actually something we were just discussing on our team yesterday. What we find traditionally is really interesting, Tom. Two things Americans have been overwhelmingly in favor of: that's term limits for Congress and a third party. The challenge is, how do you pull that off, and where does a third party come from? And that's why what happens with the GOP in this next year to 2 years is really critical. Legally, constitutionally, in the way that the electoral system works, it's very difficult, actually, to establish a third party. But if there's ever a time to really ask that question, it's certainly now. And I want to remind us, we're really focused on the GOP. The DNC, the Democratic Party, also has a major identity challenge currently unfolding within it. Right now, they're unified because they're unifying behind a new president, but those challenges are there as well. So when you think about a third party, don't only think about things coming from the right, but also consider things coming from the left as well in this country.
What are you looking at in February of this year? Give us a look forward to what Gallup wants to know from America.
I think the most important thing is how are people experiencing this unprecedented crisis of COVID? Do they feel like they're getting access to vaccinations? Do they feel like getting back to work is something that is going to be achievable in the coming months or maybe even weeks for some? Americans are very apolitical naturally in a time of hyper political focus and partisanship. The average American, based on all our data, is very focused on their job, their well-being, their family. Mental health is at a record low in this country. So Americans really want their lives to get back to normal. And they're looking for ways to do that. I think the new team this morning has a lot of work to dig this country out of the hole. It isn't, at least in terms of how people feel about how things are going.